Law enforcement officials are investigating threats against members of the grand jury that are overseeing former U.S. President Donald Trump's legal battle in the state of Georgia. Threats that reportedly came after the personal information of jury members was leaked online. That's according to the sheriff's office in Fulton County, Georgia, the center of that legal battle. It's where Trump and associates were charged earlier this week with conspiring to illegally subvert the 2020 election results in that state. NBC News and CNN had previously reported that names, addresses, photographs, and social media profiles purporting to belong to the jury were being shared online. It's been high security around Fulton County's courthouse in Atlanta over Trump's indictment. State government policy is that indictments that are made public record include the names of grand jurors, but no other personally identifiable information. The sheriff's office says it's working with both state and federal agencies to track down the origin of the threats.
Legal experts told Reuters Thursday that any attempt to move Donald Trump's legal battle in Georgia to federal court in the hopes of a more sympathetic jury is likely to fail. Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, filed a motion on Tuesday to move the case after he, Trump, and 17 others were indicted this week by Fulton County's district attorney of conspiring to illegally subvert the 2020 election results. Meadows will argue his case belongs in the federal court for the Northern District of Georgia. If he succeeds by raising rarely tested legal questions, according to the filing, it means he will be tried before a broader jury pool that covers the congressional district of conservative firebrand Marjorie Taylor Greene, rather than jurors solely from Fulton County, which supported Joe Biden by nearly a 3-to-1 margin. Georgia State Law School professor Eric Siegel said Meadows' effort would add uncertainties and delay proceedings, but ultimately it would be dismissed if courts apply the law correctly.
The request for removal is definitely going to delay this trial. It's going to be complicated and messy. Now, Donald Trump and the other defendants should lose these motions. And under the law, their case for removal is very weak. However, the lower federal courts and the Supreme Court in this country have changed a lot over the last 3 years. And there's really no telling what could happen in the courts. But if they apply the law to the facts, these motions should be denied.
Trump may follow Meadows with a similar maneuver, but Associate Professor of Law at Georgia State Law School Karen Morrison says facts at hand don't make a great case for either of them. In a phone call after the 2020 presidential election to Georgia's top election official Brad Raffensperger, Trump urged him to find enough votes to reverse his narrow loss in the state. Raffensperger declined.
Was it really their job to call Brad Raffensperger and say, come on, fellas, I just need 11,000 votes? If that's part of the regular job of the president, then okay, you can remove yourself to federal court. But I think the fact of the matter is that's not part of a president's job or any candidate's job to put pressure on local officials. And therefore, I don't think it should be removed. And who can tell what the judges are going to do? But I think overall, it's not a great case for removal.
Donald Trump had tried in June to move his criminal prosecution in New York, stemming from hush money payments to porn star Stormy Daniels, to a federal court. A U.S. judge denied his bid last month. The legal experts Reuters spoke to say Trump's odds are, quote, definitely better this time.
Because it is more plausible that, let's say there's a closer nexus between making sure that the election was fair and being the president than there is between paying a porn star and being the president.
But they also say he still doesn't necessarily have a winning claim.
The facts are very clear. They were trying to change the result of the election, not maintain its integrity.
Trump has called the indictment a political witch hunt in a social media post and accused prosecutor Fani Willis, an elected Democrat, of trying to sabotage his presidential comeback bid.
The sirens, as I had mentioned earlier.
The emergency management chief of Hawaii's Maui Island resigned on Thursday. one day after he defended not using sirens during deadly wildfires earlier this month.
Do you regret not sounding the sirens?
I do not.
Herman Ndaya had been criticized by local residents and media for the island's response to the wildfires. Some have said more would have been saved if the sirens went off. However, he told reporters Wednesday that the sirens would have been ineffective and confusing because they were chiefly used for tsunami warnings and would have possibly driven people away from the ocean and into the island's mountains, where fires were burning. It all comes more than a week after the blaze killed more than 100 people, and hundreds of others remain unaccounted for. More than 2,000 buildings were also destroyed, causing billions of dollars of damage. Ndaya cited health reasons in submitting his resignation, according to Maui County's statement. Maui County Mayor Richard Bisson was also quoted as saying, "Given the gravity of the crisis we are facing, my team and I will be placing someone in this key position as quickly as possible, and I look forward to making that announcement soon." Meanwhile, Hawaii Attorney General Ann Lopez on Thursday issued a statement saying she will appoint a private third-party agency to investigate and review how state and county officials responded to the fires.
We're like, we can't have people here, and I think that's how I felt too. We're like, we can't have tourists here right now. We need to feed and take care of our own people. But no, us here in Kihei and Wailea and a lot of places in Kula, Makawao, Paia, Haiku, those places are still running. And all those people still have their bills to pay, and they're single parents, and they have mortgages, and they own businesses.
This Kihei Cafe is one of the most popular breakfast place in this town. Usually it would be like line up fun. At least 10 to 11 people, or even longer. But right now, if you look around, it's just empty.
We were out for dinner, and my wife went out to use the washroom. And there was a person out there who was upset that tourists were still here and just, wondering why we were still here and all of that. And
first they said no travel. Now they're saying, well, part of the island, it's okay, right? And tomorrow it'll be some other story. But I can tell you almost without an exception, all the little shop owners that we met in Moapu and Paea and some of these other little towns, they're excited to see us. There's no one here. Our resort is empty. So if the goal was for the resorts to just, open up their rooms for all the people that lost their homes, that's not happening. So what's the point of keeping tourists out?
All 20,000 residents of the northern Canadian city of Yellowknife are leaving town after an evacuation order was declared as wildfires move closer. Canadian fire crews are battling the blaze as thick smoke blanketed the capital of the vast and sparsely populated Northwest Territories. The Territorial Fire Service said in a statement on Facebook, quote, "Very tough days ahead, with 2 days of northwest to west-northwest winds on Friday and Saturday, which would push fire towards Yellowknife. This is Canada's worst ever wildfire season, with more than 1,000 active fires burning across the country. Experts say climate change has exacerbated the wildfire problem. The territories, with a population of just 46,000 people, have limited infrastructure, and there is only one 2-lane road out of Yellowknife to the province of Alberta to the south. The deadline for residents to leave is noon local time on Friday. The fire is currently about 10 miles northwest of the city, and authorities say it could reach the outskirts by Saturday if there is no rain. So far, about 52,000 square miles of land in Canada have been scorched, more than 6 times a 10-year average. Nearly 200,000 people have been forced to evacuate at some point this season.
We're not that far away from a new Women's World Cup champion being crowned here at Stadium Australia in Sydney. England take on Spain on Sunday in an all-European clash to determine the winner of the 9th edition of the global tournament. This year's World Cup, hosted by New Zealand and Australia, was the first to feature 32 teams. The 4-week event has produced a number of shocks, with 2-time champions Germany crashing out in the group stage, along with Olympic champions Canada. Meanwhile, the holders and 4-time winners the United States went out in the last 16 on a penalty shootout to Sweden, with veteran forward Megan Rapinoe missing her spot kick on her last appearance on the global stage. It's all about a new era in women's football, and in just their third World Cup, Spain have reached the final, building on their recent dominance at club level in Europe. But standing in their way is England, who ended the fairy tale run of co-host Australia in the semi-finals, match in which more than 11 million Australians tuned in, making it the country's most watched TV event in history. England's Lionesses are led by Dutch coach Sarina Wiegman, who took the Netherlands to a runners-up finish in France in 2019. Since taking over in 2021, Wiegman has transformed England into a ruthless winning machine, leading them to clinching their first major title at the European Championship last year. Now, the Lionesses are in their first ever World Cup final, looking to complete a historic double.
The Women's World Cup has made more than $570 million in revenue. FIFA President Gianni Infantino made the announcement Friday. The money made has helped soccer's global governing body to break even, despite raising the prize purse for the tournament tenfold compared to the 2015 competition. Infantino called the event the best and greatest and biggest Women's World Cup.
Some voices were raised, well, it costs too much. We don't make enough revenues, we'll have to subsidize. And our opinion was, well, if we have to subsidize, we'll subsidize, because we have to do that. But actually this World Cup generated over 570 million US dollars in revenues. And so we broke even.
In a typically combative speech, he further said the tournament's success had backed up FIFA's decision to raise the prize money and to host it in Australia and New Zealand. Infantino also said it justified the decision to expand the competition to 32 teams from a previous total of 24.
We didn't lose any money, and we generated the second highest income of any sport besides, of course, the men World Cup at global stage. More than $500 million. There are not many competitions, even in men's football, who generate more than $500 million.
The $152 million prize purse being shared by the women at the event is still far short of the $440 million for the Men's World Cup last year. England play Spain in the final in Sydney on Sunday to close the tournament.
From Russia's ruble rescue plan to Ford's pricey hot rod debut, this is the week in numbers. 350 was how many basis points Russia's central bank hiked its key interest rate on Tuesday. It's an attempt to support the ruble, which fell past the 100 threshold against the dollar. The interest rate now stands at 12%, but that's some way off the 20% high following the last emergency action in February 2022. $100 million is how much US prosecutors say disgraced crypto mogul Sam Bankman-Fried donated to political parties using money he stole from customers of his collapsed FTX exchange. An amended indictment alleges Bankman-Fried directed two of his executives to conceal donations to both Democrats and Republicans in order to evade finance contribution limits. He's previously pleaded not guilty to stealing billions in customer funds. $85 billion was the day one stock market value of a Vietnamese electric vehicle startup VinFast. Its shares surged on its Wall Street debut on Tuesday. The valuation puts VinFast ahead of Ford at $48 billion and GM at $46 billion. It's now looking to take on industry leader Tesla in the North American market, with a $4 billion factory in North Carolina. Meanwhile, $300,000 is the price for Ford's newly unveiled entry to the US supercar ranks. That hefty windshield sticker will get you the 2025 Mustang GTD, a high-performance hot rod powered by a 5.2-litre V8 fossil-fueled engine. It's a quirky shift for a company that's also committing billions of dollars to building millions of zero-emission electric vehicles.
Chinese developer Evergrande has filed for bankruptcy protection in a US court. The property giant made the move in one of the world's biggest debt restructuring exercises. The firm's problems add to growing investor worries about China's property debt crisis and its overall economy. Evergrande was once China's top-selling developer, but is now the world's most indebted property company. It has more than $300 billion in liabilities. Evergrande has sought protection under Chapter 15 of the US Bankruptcy Code. It shields non-US companies undergoing restructurings from creditors that hope to sue them or tie up assets in the US. The filing is procedural in nature, but sources say the company must do it as part of a restructuring process under US law. Evergrande declined to comment. The company's offshore debt restructuring involves a total of $31.7 billion. It will meet with its creditors later this month to discuss its restructuring proposal. A number of Chinese property developers have defaulted on their offshore debt obligations, leaving in its wake unfinished homes, plunging sales, and battered investor confidence. The property sector makes up about a quarter of the economy. The crisis has led to a contagion risk, which could further hurt a Chinese economy already weakened by slower growth. Evergrande's problems come days after a major Chinese asset manager missed repayment obligations on some investment products and warned of a liquidity crisis, while China's #1 developer Country Garden has become the latest to signal a cash crunch. All of this comes at a time when property investment, home sales and new construction have contracted for more than a year. China is targeting 5% annual growth for its economy this year, but a growing number of economists warn it could miss that goal unless Beijing ramps up support measures to stop the decline.
British retailers reported a bigger than expected drop in sales in July. That was partly down to rainy weather, as well as shoppers feeling the hit from high inflation and 14 back-to-back increases in interest rates. Data showed volumes last month were 1.2% lower than in June, a larger drop than analysts' forecasts. Sterling weakened as investors assessed the sales drop and whether it represented a warning sign about a slowdown in Britain's sluggish economy. That's beyond the hit caused by the 6th wettest July in records dating back to 1836. Throughout the month, more than a quarter of retail sales took place online. The ONS said it was a particularly bad time for food stores, as sales volumes fell by a monthly 2.6%. And for non-food stores, it fell by 1.7%. As well as Britain's unpredictable weather, consumers have been hit by high inflation, which stood at almost 7% last month, from a peak of about 11% last October. It remains the highest among the world's large rich economies. However, July's data represented only the second time that sales volumes fell on a month-to-month basis so far in 2023. This suggests resilience in consumer demand. Chocolate makers like Hershey and Mondelez face tougher trading conditions over the next year. That as they try to pass on soaring cocoa costs to customers who are cutting back. Over the past few years, the industry has enjoyed big profits, as demand for chocolate has held up despite price hikes. But data shows this trend may be breaking. It comes as prices for cocoa hit 46-year highs, and sugar prices are near their highest in more than a decade. Chocolate makers are betting on the traditional resilience of their product to overcome price increases. Cadbury maker Mondelez raised its annual revenue growth forecasts last month, while Hershey hiked its profit forecast. But consumers in Europe and North America have already seen price hikes of about 20% in the last 2 years, and data shows they're starting to cut back on the chocolate they buy. Mondelez expects inflation in cocoa and sugar to continue. In response, the company said it is ensuring it is significantly hedged and continuing to drive productivity. But after more than 2 years of higher prices, analysts said retailers are pushing back. And Mondelez previously pulled Cadbury and Milka bars from a major Belgian supermarkets chain after failing to agree on prices. Mondelez's chocolate sales volume growth has weakened substantially this year. And data showed Hershey sales volumes increasingly declined during the period as the company hiked prices. Hershey said it hoped its sales volumes would reverse their current downtrend as it eased off the rate of price hikes.
The leaders of Japan and South Korea are coming to the U.S. for a weekend summit with President Joe Biden, part of a bid by Washington to strengthen ties between two key American allies. Tokyo and Seoul have a long history of acrimony and distrust, but tensions are easing amid rising concerns over an increasingly aggressive China and an erratic North Korea. Here is Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida before departing for the summit Thursday.
As the international norms built on freedom and openness are shaken, our bilateral relationships with the United States and South Korea that have been at its strongest will be the foundation of this historical opportunity to bolster the strategic relationship between the three countries.
South Korean President Yoon Tong-yeol focused on the country's neighbor to the north in comments about the summit earlier this week.
In order to fundamentally block North Korea's nuclear and missile threats, the Republic of Korea, the United States, and Japan must closely cooperate on reconnaissance assets and share North Korea's nuclear weapons and missiles data in real time.
North Korea issued another escalatory threat ahead of the summit, saying it may launch an intercontinental ballistic missile or take other military action to protest the meeting. That's according to a South Korean lawmaker on Thursday, citing the country's intelligence agency. While the summit is unlikely to produce a formal security arrangement that commits the nations to each other's defense, they will likely agree to a mutual understanding about regional responsibilities. The summit comes as the leaders of the three democracies face doubts at home. Only some 4 in 10 voters say they approve of Yoon, Kishida, and Biden in the countries they govern. And there is little evidence closer security ties are a priority for ordinary citizens.
West African bloc ECOWAS stands ready to intervene militarily if all else fails to reverse a coup in Niger, the senior official said on Thursday. Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security, Abdel Fattah al-Musa, said the valiant forces of West Africa are ready to answer the call of duty. That was as he addressed army generals from member states who were meeting in Ghana.
By all means available, constitutional order will be restored in the country. And this meeting today bears testimony to that.
Military officers in Niger deposed President Mohamed Bazoum on July 26. They've defied calls from the United Nations, ECOWAS and Western powers to reinstate him. That prompted West African heads of state to order a standby force to be assembled. Musa listed past ECOWAS deployments in Gambia, Liberia and elsewhere as examples of readiness. He also accused the junta of playing cat and mouse with the bloc.
They are pretending, that, now they are ready for talks. But even as they are telling us that they are ready for talks, they are still seeking reasons to justify an unjustifiable coup d'etat.
Musa also strongly criticised the junta's announcement that it planned to put Bazoum on trial for treason. The United Nations, European Union and ECOWAS have all expressed concerns over the conditions of his detention. The junta has said it's open to talks to resolve the crisis. In Niger's capital, Niamey, large crowds have taken part in protests against ECOWAS and in favour of the coup leaders. Demonstrators accuse ECOWAS of being manipulated by foreign powers and say they reject outside intervention.
Leaders of countries that account for more than a quarter of the global economy are set to meet in South Africa. Up for discussion at the Brics summit starting on August 22nd, how to turn this loose club of nations into a geopolitical force capable of challenging the West's dominance in global affairs. Brics stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. The leaders of those countries will be in physical attendance, with one notable exception. That's Russian President Vladimir Putin, who faces an international arrest warrant over alleged war crimes in Ukraine, though he is expected to attend virtually. Few details have emerged about what Brics leaders plan to discuss. However, expansion is expected to be high on the agenda. Some 40 nations have shown an interest in joining, either formally or informally, officials have said, including Saudi Arabia, Argentina and Egypt. However, there could be tensions. China wants to enlarge Brics quickly as it tussles with the United States for geopolitical influence. Brazil is resisting, fearing the already unwieldy club could see its stature diluted. Russia is keen to bring in new members as it seeks friends amid its diplomatic isolation over Ukraine. Its most important African ally, South Africa, is on the same page. India is on the fence. What unites the bloc, though, is skepticism about a world order they see as serving the interests of the United States and its rich country allies. Brics nations are keen to project themselves as alternative development partners to the West. The bloc's new development bank wants to de-dollarize finance and offer an alternative to the IMF and the World Bank. However, it's only approved $33 billion of loans in nearly a decade. That's about a third of the amount the World Bank committed to disbursing just last year. The NDB has also been hobbled by sanctions on Russia. South African officials say talk of a Brics currency, mooted by Brazil earlier this year as an alternative to dollar dependence, is off the table.
Institutional development of Brics.
Nevertheless, South Africa's Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor has said Brics wants to show leadership, particularly in terms of the development and inclusion of the Global South in multilateral systems. The theme of the Johannesburg summit is Brics and Africa. That emphasises how the bloc can build ties on a continent increasingly becoming a theatre for competition between world powers. Africa is also in the eye of the climate change storm. Carbon-intensive Brics nations, accounting for 40% of the global population, also make up about the same share of greenhouse gas emissions. Brics countries blame rich nations for causing the most global warming and want them to take on more of the burden of decarbonising the world's energy supply. Officials in Brazil, China and South Africa said climate change may come up at the summit, but indicated it wouldn't be a priority. Here's what's been making the business headlines in sub-Saharan Africa this week. China has resumed imports of South African beef, its customs administration said on Thursday. They were banned in March 2022 due to an outbreak of foot and mouth disease on a cattle farm. The resumption comes just ahead of a visit by President Xi Jinping to South Africa for the Brics summit. Also on Brics, the bloc's development bank closed the auction for its first South African Rand bonds, a R1 billion 5-year note and a R500 million 3-year note, on Tuesday. The new development bank has been under pressure to boost its local currency fundraising and lending. A Nigerian court on Thursday adjourned a hearing for suspended central bank governor Godwin Emefiele until August 23rd, as a co-defendant was unable to attend, a government lawyer said. That meant Emefiele, who is facing a 20-count fraud charge, was unable to enter a plea. Also in legal news, the Madagascan president's chief of staff has been arrested in London on suspicion of seeking a bribe from Precious Stones miner Gemfields, the UK's National Crime Agency said. Romy Andrinariso and a French associate, Philippe Tabuteau, were allegedly seeking $286,000 and a 5% equity stake to secure licenses to operate in Madagascar. A lawyer for Andrinariso did not respond to a request for comment. One representing Tabuteau declined to comment. Madagascan President Andry Rajoelina's office said the aide had been sacked with immediate effect. The NCA expressed its gratitude to Gemfields for raising the matter. And finally, Safaricom's M-Pesa mobile money service went live in Ethiopia on Wednesday. The Kenyan telecoms operator is betting that Ethiopia, which has around 120 million people and one of Africa's youngest populations, will power growth for years to come. At a makeshift roadside studio in Niger's capital Niamey, Boubacar Djibo's brush brings a landscape of undulating sand dunes to life. The message of this canvas is ominous. Missiles reflect the threat of military intervention to reverse a coup last month. The darkness, symbolic of sanctions and their effect on electricity supplies.
I see that the whole of Africa is rising up today to really fight neo-colonialism and have independence, total freedom in our nations. So this has inspired me a lot, and I express myself through my work.
In Niamey, artists are exploring ways to engage with a political crisis that threatens the stability of not only their country, but the wider region. Military officers deposed President Mohamed Bazoum on July 26th. They have defied calls to reinstate him from the United Nations and West African bloc ECOWAS. The latter has said it is ready to intervene militarily as a last resort. But in the capital, many residents were deeply disillusioned with Bazoum's government and are supportive of the coup. That's also evident among some creatives like Isifu Umaru, also known as Fino. At a studio in the capital, he and other rappers record lyrics on resilience, nationalism, and change.
The population has demonstrated by A plus B that it supports military action in our country. So no international community has the right, the duty, or even the mandate to say that we don't know what we want.
Elsewhere, Hamid Guissa was putting the final touches to his painting. He says his country is in a fragile state, with people inciting hatred and division. His artwork is a message of hope. I dream of a Niger that is united, he says, not by its political parties, but by the love of the country, by the love of Niger.
Paramilitary troops were called in to guard a Christian settlement in eastern Pakistan on Thursday, where a Muslim mob vandalised and torched several churches and scores of houses. The violence unfolded after 2 men were accused of desecrating the Quran in Jaramwala, the industrial district of Faisalabad, police said. Rioters were demanding that the 2 accused men be handed over to them, though the pair had already fled their homes. This protester accused the police of failing to act to bring the accused men to justice. When a man smuggles cocaine, he is apprehended within hours, but the blasphemers have not been arrested after 24 hours, he says. Police should side with Muslims, he adds. The attack started on Wednesday, continuing for more than 10 hours without any intervention by police who were at the scene, witnesses said.
People's houses were burned down. 3 or 4 churches were set on fire. Whatever happened could have been settled through negotiations by sitting down together, which did not happen. Now things have reached a stage where rangers have been called in. The entire city is in lockdown.
Police denied the accusations and said security forces at the scene had prevented an even worse situation. Salim Qasim Mas's home was among those gutted.
When I saw my house, I felt a jolt in my heart and I thought I was going to fall. I immediately came out of my house and sat down. We have not committed any crime. All this is a grave injustice towards us.
Residents said they witnessed thousands of Muslims, led by local clerics, carrying iron rods, sticks, knives and daggers during the rioting. The troops have cordoned off the Christian colony, blocking all entry and exit points with barbed wire, while hundreds of Christians took refuge in a nearby district. Police arrested over 100 suspected rioters, the Pakistani government confirmed in a statement, adding that an inquiry had been ordered into the incident. Local and national government leaders pledged support for the Christian community in the aftermath. This is provincial government leader Mohsin Naqvi.
The losses that you people have suffered, as a government, as a Muslim, as a human being, it is my duty to compensate your loss and restore it to its original form. This is my and my team's promise to you that within 3 or 4 days, we will restore your properties to their original state. Our teams are already working on it.
Blasphemy is punishable by death in Pakistan, and although no one has ever been executed for it, many accused people have been lynched by outraged crowds. Rights groups say accusations of blasphemy are sometimes used to settle scores. That has left hundreds of people in prison after being accused, because judges often put off trials, fearing retribution if they are seen as being too lenient, according to the rights groups.
The criminal charges filed against former U.S. President Donald Trump in Georgia include allegations that he violated laws designed to fight organized crime groups in the 1970s, called RICO. But what is RICO, and how is an anti-mafia law used against Trump? RICO stands for the Racketeering, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act. It was passed by Congress in 1970, mostly to target the mafia. Most states, including Georgia, then followed suit with their own versions. Professor David Sklansky is with Stanford University's law school.
Like the federal model, the Georgia statute allows prosecutors to sweep together in a single indictment, and most likely in a single trial, a large number of defendants and a large number of different criminal schemes, all of which are related only in that they're part of the same overall pattern of racketeering through an enterprise. And a pattern of racketeering just means 2 or more violations of particular state crimes.
RICO was made to go after mafia kingpins who kept their hands clean by letting henchmen do the dirty work and parking any money they got from it in shell companies or other fronts. So why is RICO being used now? Today, the mafia has largely been dismantled in the United States, but prosecutors have widened RICO's use to other groups, such as Wall Street banks that engage in illegal market manipulation. The Fulton County District Attorney prosecuting Trump is herself no stranger to the statute.
To date, this office has indicted, since I've been sitting as the district attorney, over 12,000 cases. This is the 11th RICO indictment.
The district attorney who brought this case, Fannie Willis, previously prosecuted a number of educators in the Atlanta area for a conspiracy to cheat on standardized tests. And that was a RICO indictment, a Georgia RICO indictment. It charged 35 different defendants. It is cumbersome. It does create lots of complications, but it's been done before, and it's been done before by this district attorney.
As it pertains to Trump and the 18 associates charged with him, prosecutors wouldn't necessarily need to prove that he personally broke the law. They'll try to prove that he knowingly coordinated with others who did. The indictment alleges a conspiracy by Trump and his allies to subvert the results of the 2020 election in Georgia through a combination of pressure on state officials and attempts to illegally access election equipment. Trump denies wrongdoing and maintains that the charges are politically motivated.
Are you using the right sunscreen? With world temperatures reaching record highs this summer, experts say you might need to think twice. Sunscreens aren't all the same, and during extreme heat, those differences can matter. There are 2 major types. Mineral sunscreens create a physical barrier that reflects UV light before it penetrates the skin. They're not absorbed, so older formulas often felt greasy and left that iconic white cast. Chemical sunscreens form a thin protective film that absorbs UV rays and changes their structure. If your sunscreen comes in the form of a lighter cream or spray, it might be this. But according to the American Academy of Dermatology, you'll want to reach for mineral sunscreens during heat waves, when temperatures hit 90 degrees Fahrenheit or above with high humidity. That's because chemical sunscreens can lose their filtering abilities when exposed to extremely high temperatures. And it's not just about choosing the right sunscreen. Habits matter too. Many people only apply about 20% to 50% of the sunscreen they need. Adults need 1 ounce of sunscreen, about a shot glass full, and dermatologists recommend a double layer for your face or anywhere else that's more exposed. Sunscreens should usually be reapplied every 2 hours and after swimming or sweating. But you'll be sweating more during a heat wave, so you need to reapply more often. They also say leaving your sunscreen out in the heat can decrease its efficacy, so try storing it in a cool, dark place.
Sea level rise threatens the future of these low-lying islands, and increasing ocean heat and acidification, marine heat waves, is harming vital and very vulnerable marine ecosystems. Now we have an El Niño event, and this is very likely to continue for the rest of the year. And to quote WMO Secretary General Professor Petri Talas, he said, "This will have a big impact on the Southwest Pacific region, as it is frequently associated with higher temperatures, disruptive weather patterns, more marine heat waves, and coral bleaching."
Peru has granted a rare exception to its restrictive abortion laws and allowed an 11-year-old girl to terminate a pregnancy in a case that rights groups say highlights a lack of support for child victims of sexual abuse. The girl has been publicly identified only by the name Mila and, according to a police report, was raped for years by her stepfather. Earlier this month, she approached a hospital in an area of the Amazon for an abortion, but was turned away. Peru's reversal of that earlier denial came after the United Nations pressured authorities to intervene. Abortion is only legal there if the mother's life is endangered. Susana Chavez is the director of a feminist NGO called Promsex.
Mila es una niña de 11 años.
Mila is an 11-year-old girl who unfortunately lives in a situation of deep poverty, in one of the areas where there is the highest rate of pregnancies among girls, and where sexual violence is widely tolerated. Mila was subjected to rape since she was 7 years old. The authorities were aware that she was a child victim of inappropriate touching. However, they did not intervene in that family until years later when Mila got pregnant. They wanted to force her to continue with the pregnancy because they told her this was her destiny and that abortion was dangerous.
Meanwhile, authorities are searching for Mila's stepfather, who was arrested in July but later released for insufficient evidence. That move was widely criticized, and the Peruvian presidency ordered his immediate recapture. His whereabouts are unknown.
This is what the streets of Egypt look like at night. Rolling blackouts have become a symbol of its economic crisis, as the country faces record inflation and a weakening currency. And that's a big problem for President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, just months before the country heads to the polls.
الواحد بيبقى مخنوق نفسيته بتتعب. كان الواحد عايش في تربة.
Residents haven't experienced this level of service cuts since the uprising years ago, when frequent outages helped turn the public against Egypt's first democratically elected leader, Mohamed Morsi. Sisi led his ouster in July 2013. Critics like Gamila Ismail, head of Al Dastour Party, one of the opposition groups, sees echoes of the past today.
انقطاع الكهرباء هو في الحقيقة مظهر من مظاهر فشل السياسات الاقتصادية والفشل في الإدارة. في الحقيقة الانقطاع بتاع التيار الكهربي ما حصلش من 2013، فهو بيرجعنا شوية لسنين طويلة ورا واللحظة سياسية ما، فالناس عندها شعور إنه إحنا ماشيين في اتجاه معين ممكن يبقى مشابه لاتجاه حصل من سنوات طويلة.
Sisi took power in 2014 on promises of stability and development. A former army chief who's overseen a far-reaching crackdown on political dissent, he's widely expected to secure a third term in elections due by early 2024. But Egypt's economic troubles are shaking faith in his record. Sisi has shifted blame largely on other factors like the global health crisis and the war in Ukraine. This is Mustafa Bakri, a pro-Sisi member of parliament. He acknowledges that the economy is suffering from crises, but likens it to the financial troubles in the US. He says the Egyptian people will bear the burden because they learned their lesson after the 2011 protests. Analysts say the electricity cuts are partly caused by a dip in Egypt's production of natural gas, which powers most of Egypt's grid and is an important earner of hard currency. The government denies that and says the cuts were simply necessary due to a surge in air conditioner use during unusually hot weather. Residents say they have hit some areas harder than others, fueling a sense of inequality as many complain that life has become tougher due to subsidy reforms, taxes, and soaring prices.
Cash flow problems in China's real estate sector has some investors worried. They're concerned it could spill over into multiple sectors of the country's economy. Country Garden was China's largest property developer before this year, but it's now enduring a debt crisis, while one of China's top asset managers with major real estate exposure is also struggling. Zhongrong, a subsidiary of Zhongji Enterprise Group, has missed some repayment obligations, prompting investors to protest outside of its building in Beijing. The state of these firms has fueled worries the country's real estate woes may affect its $57 trillion financial industry. It has also highlighted the potential of outsized exposure of China's $3 trillion shadow banking sector to the property sector. Gary is a senior economist at Natixis.
As long as the problem in the cash flow of developers are not solved, it's possible to see more credit events like this here and there across the shadow banking sector. So I think in general, it means that investors are likely to be more risk adverse, which doesn't really serve too well for the goal to actually help developers.
Since the sector's debt crisis unfolded in mid-2021, companies accounting for 40% of Chinese home sales have defaulted. Most of them were private property developers. It has led to many unfinished homes, unpaid suppliers and creditors. Those creditors are not only financial institutions, but also ordinary people who bought wealth management products linked to trust financing. There is very little liquidity left in both the equity and debt markets as investors and creditors now avoid the sector. With home sales already very weak, the debt crisis could delay the prospect of a recovery of both the property market and the broader Chinese economy. China's property sector accounts for more than half of global new home sales and home building. It is the largest asset class in the world, with an estimated market value of around 62 trillion. The Chinese government is yet to announce any bold stimulus measures to combat the issue.
From a job cooking school lunches to lugging jerry cans of Fukushima seawater for radiation tests, Ai Kimura has no background in science. However, after the Fukushima nuclear disaster in 2011, she and a group of other women began to help test the city's water and food. And they fear that Japan's preparations this summer to release more than 1 million tons of treated radioactive water in the sea nearby could stir up anxiety reminiscent of the tragedy 12 years ago. The non-profit workers call themselves Tarachine, which means mother in traditional Japanese poetry. Most of them are indeed local moms who were taught by doctors and scientists to measure radiation. Kimura serves as Secretary General of the group.
It's clear that little by little the level of radiation is falling as 12 years have passed. Our measurements have confirmed that the amount of radioactive material is lower now than it was 12 years ago.
Kimura lost her job making school lunches after the disaster. She joined the group in 2014 and learned to measure radiation in the hopes of protecting her daughters, who were teenagers then.
There are no walls in the sea, so once you release the treated water, it will probably continue to be released for decades or even centuries until the fuel debris from the Fukushima plant is removed, and you can't take the treated water back.
The government and an international nuclear regulator say the plan to release the water is safe, but it has alarmed neighbors, particularly China and Asia's fishing industry. Authorities say the water has been filtered to remove most radioactive elements, except for one called tritium, which is hard to separate from water. But the treated water will be diluted to well below internationally approved levels of tritium before being released into the Pacific Ocean.
When the water is released, we will keep on providing data so that fathers and mothers can decide for themselves, and children can also decide when they grow up whether to eat Fukushima fish or not, or whether to go swimming in the sea or not.
Kimura says what the mothers want is more dialogue between officials and plant operator Tokyo Electric Power on one side and fishermen and citizens on the other, over not only safety but also the release's psychological impact. Japan has not yet said when they will release the water. The husband of pop superstar Britney Spears is seeking divorce after 14 months of marriage. Sam Asghari and Spears had their wedding months after she was freed from a conservatorship that her father set up, in which her personal life and finances were controlled for more than a decade. However, on Thursday, Asghari cited irreconcilable differences between the pair, according to a filing in a Los Angeles court on Wednesday. He also seeks spousal support and payment of legal fees by Spears. On his social media, the 29-year-old said he and Spears have decided to end their journey together, adding they will hold on to the love and respect they have for each other. Representatives for Spears did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Asghari and 41-year-old Spears got married in June last year after dating for nearly 6 years. During court proceedings around her conservatorship, the pop star said she longed to get married and start a new family without any restrictions.
通过我们最新一代发布的超级电机，我们的机器人可以统一控制它的每一个关节，让它的动作非常自然。
做的非常的真实，包括他的眼睛，还有他的五官的一些动作，还有他手部的流畅度，都是比原来要更真实的。然后包括以后的话，我觉得如果我是相信这些机器人，它以后肯定会慢慢取代掉我们一些重复性的工作。
Being a companion, lifting up heavy loads, helping with physical therapy, the duties of caregivers may soon be helped or replaced by robots. In a world where humans are facing a rising demand for healthcare services and the supply of caregivers is falling short, how could robots play a bigger role in helping older people?
I believe that robots can be a great asset in providing care and assistance to vulnerable people.
At a conference organized by the International Telecommunication Union in Geneva, robot expert Nadia Magdanet-Thalmann told Reuters that AI-powered robots like Nadine could play a future role as companions in care homes.
It's great to meet you two. How can I help you?
This is a social robot equipped with human-like gestures and expressions. Thalmann said Nadine and robots like her can be on hand 24 hours a day.
I worked as a companion in the elderly home Brics in Singapore during 2020. My role was to interact with elderly on their demands and play bingo with them. It was a great experience and I enjoyed interacting with the elderly and helping them with their needs.
In China, an entrepreneur hopes robots can cope with the world's aging population. According to UN reports, the global population over 65 is projected to increase from 10% in 2022 to 16% in 2050. As the global demand for nurses and carers heats up, some countries see a staffing crisis in care homes. But Zhen Ko, the co-founder and global CEO of Fourier Intelligence, thinks humanoid robots could one day ease the shortage.
And as we age, the elderly require more, support. So there are lack of clinicians and caregivers. So we are creating technologies to help to actually provide services and treatments and care for elderly.
Although the robot is still in the research and development phase, Ko hopes a working prototype could be ready in 2 to 3 years. He hopes one day humanoid robots can carry patients from their bed to wheelchairs or help pick up objects.
If I'm lifting the heavy box and I want the robot to carry it for me.
In the future, robots may be able to do all your heavy lifting. Scientists from the Italian Institute of Technology are developing a new humanoid robot called ErgoCub. It's designed for ergonomic interaction with humans and efficient locomotion. Developers say they're working to make it strong and robust enough to take on physically demanding tasks. That means robots may soon take on laborious tasks in workplaces for their aging human counterparts.
From the sensory point of view, the robot has also enhanced 3D vision. There's more sensors. It's also tactile equipped, so it can manipulate objects and feels the contact with the world physically. Again, we're planning for stronger machines, more dynamics, more powerful motors, because indeed we need robots to help us.
This is Reuters.